Today, we're tackling Pakistani politics.
Sounds intense.
It is, but fascinating too. We've got a whole bunch of sources, like historical stuff, how the government works, the nuts and bolts.
Right.
And a ton on the challenges Pakistan's dealing with.
Should give us a pretty good picture, huh? By the end, you'll really get the complexities. And maybe even see where things are heading.
Exactly. So picture this, right? A country born in 1947, out of partition, has to figure out who they are, like instantly, build everything from scratch.
And all while surrounded by tension.
No wonder their history's been a bit of a roller coaster.
Totally. That's starting to kind of set the scene, So back and forth, civilian government, then military rule. You had Ayub Khan in the 50s, Zia-ul Haq later, more recently, Pervez Musharraf, all came to power through coups.
It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Yeah.
But even when there are civilians in charge, the military still seems to have a lot of say.
Oh, for sure. Especially on security or anything foreign policy. Makes you wonder who really holds the power.
Good point.
Like, take the 18th Amendment. Passed in 2010. Gave provinces more autonomy, on paper at least.
Okay.
But then you've got the military. Their influence runs deep, especially with foreign policy and security. Adds a whole other layer to it.
So it's this constant push and pull between those two forces.
Yeah.
But then there's the bigger question, right?
What's that?
How does Pakistan balance wanting democracy with, this history of the military stepping in?
It's fundamental to how their politics work. And to really get it, we've got to talk about 1971.
Right.
East Pakistan broke away. Became Bangladesh.
Right, a lot of tension led to that political, ethnic.
Yeah, traumatic time.
Yeah.
And it really changed how Pakistan deals with internal problems, how they think about staying unified as a nation.
So how have they tried to address that to make things more stable,
Well, for all the ups and downs, the AVE kept trying to make democracy work. The 1973 Constitution's a good example. Laid the groundwork for a parliamentary system, basic rights.
On paper, it all sounds good.
Putting it into practice, though, that's the tough part.
Makes sense. Having the rules is one thing. Making them work in such a complex country, that's something else.
Definitely.
So how does the government function? We know it's a federal republic parliamentary system, power split between the president, prime minister, and the bicameral parliament.
That's the gist, yeah. But the way the parliament works, the two houses, it's designed for balance. In a pretty unique way.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How does that balance actually work? It sounds like they put a lot of effort into making sure everyone's represented.
You got it. The Senate, especially. It makes sure each province, each territory, has a voice. Not just the ones with the most people. Vital in a diverse country like Pakistan.
So it stops one area from having too much power, kind of like the US Senate, but with even more emphasis on regions.
You could say that. And don't forget the 18th Amendment, right? That gave provinces more control over their stuff. Education, resources.
Could lead to more unity or maybe more competition between them. What's the overall effect been?
Bit of both, honestly. Provinces can focus on their needs, which is good, but then you have to coordinate with the federal government. Sometimes that's smooth, sometimes it's a recipe for, friction. Disputes over resources or how policies are done.
A real balancing act, for sure. Now, where does the judiciary fit into all this? We know the Supreme Court's at the top, but what's their role in such a dynamic system?
They're essential, honestly. Especially when political power is always shifting, being challenged.
I see.
The judiciary keeps things in check, makes sure everyone's following the Constitution. Theoretically, they're the guardians of the law, no matter who's running the show.
That makes sense. You need that strong, independent judiciary to keep things stable, make sure the rules are followed. But let's be real, things aren't always so black and white. I'm sure there have been times when the judiciary has gotten caught up in the politics too.
Oh, absolutely. They haven't always been immune to pressure, let's say. Keeping that independence, being impartial, it's tough. Especially when the lines between civilian and military power get blurry.
So we've got this interplay between civilian and military forces, a system designed to balance regional interests, and a judiciary trying to uphold the law amidst all the maneuvering. It's fascinating, but it also sounds like a recipe for potential conflict and instability.
You're not wrong. The potential's there, definitely. But we got to remember, Pakistan has shown it can bounce back time and time again. It's a nation that's faced so much, yet always found a way to adapt and keep going.
Good point. It's easy to get caught up in the what-ifs and the potential problems, but there's also a story of resilience here. And speaking of dynamics, let's talk about the actual players. Pakistan's got a vibrant political scene, lots of parties, each with their own views, their own base.
It really does. And it reflects how diverse Pakistani society is. You've got PTI, Imran Khan's party. They got big by fighting corruption, appealing to people tired of the same old politics.
Yeah, their rise was pretty dramatic. They tapped into that desire for change, especially among the younger voters.
For sure.
But then you've got the more established parties, PMLN, PPP. What are they all about?
Well, PMLN, they're often linked with Nawaz Sharif. Focus on development, business-friendly policies. They've had a big impact on the economy, though whether that's good or bad depends who you ask.
And what about PPP? They've been around forever, haven't they?
Yep, deep roots. The Bhutto family legacy is strong there. They're all about democratic values, social justice. Their support comes from a lot of rural areas, working class folks.
So we've got these three big players, PTI, PMLN, and PPP, each with their own appeal, their own plans. But it's not just them, is it? There are tons of smaller parties representing specific religious groups, regions. Just adds to the complexity.
Exactly. You've got religious parties wanting a bigger role for Islam in public life, regional parties fighting for their province, and then smaller ones with very specific issues they care about.
Having all these different voices seems good in theory. People can find a party that actually reflects what they believe. But how does it actually work when it comes to governing? Do all these forces work together, or is it just constant clashes?
Well, that's where elections come in. Every 5 years, Pakistan votes. Whoever gets the most seats in the National Assembly, they form the government, and the Election Commission, they make sure things are as fair as possible.
Sounds simple enough, but I imagine it's tough to guarantee truly fair elections in such a vibrant and sometimes volatile political scene. There must be concerns about transparency, the potential for rigging, and whether people even bother to vote.
You're absolutely right. Getting those free and fair elections, it's an ongoing battle. There have been accusations of rigging before, and voter turnout can be low. Especially among younger people, they've gotten disillusioned with the whole system.
So you've got old and new political forces, an electoral system trying to be fair, and that history of military intervention always looming in the background. Makes you wonder what the biggest roadblocks are for Pakistan to actually become a truly democratic nation.
That's the key question, and one we'll tackle after a short break. We'll explore those roadblocks, from corruption to economic woes, and see if there are any reasons to be optimistic amidst all the challenges.
Okay, so we've covered how things work inside Pakistan. The power struggles, the parties, the elections. But there's the whole outside world too, right? Pakistan's in a tough neighborhood, geopolitically speaking. Must make for some interesting foreign policy choices.
Oh, it absolutely does. They've got this whole web of relationships to manage. Neighbors, global powers. It's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And you can't talk about Pakistani foreign policy without talking about India.
Yeah, the elephant in the room. It's been tense, even hostile, pretty much since day one.
Right.
You've got Kashmir, still unresolved. All the history from partition, it runs deep.
It goes beyond history, though. This rivalry has a real impact on people, on both sides. Politicians use it to get support. Pakistan spends a ton on defense, which means less for other things they need.
It's like this cycle of mistrust, so hard to break. But then there's China, total opposite. We hear about this all-weather friendship. How'd that get so strong?
Well, a few things. China's been a reliable ally. Diplomatic support, military aid, the whole package. And lately, it's gotten even closer. With CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor.
CPEC, that's been in the news a lot. Huge project. China pouring billions into Pakistan. Roads, railways, energy. Could be a game changer, but I gotta ask, is there a worry about getting too dependent on China?
You hit the nail on the head. CPEC has potential, no doubt, but there are risks. The debt Pakistan's taking on, is it sustainable? And what about China's influence growing in the region? Those are real concerns.
So both good and bad possibilities there. Pakistan's walking a tightrope, wanting the environment, but not wanting to rely too much on any one country. And then there's the U.S. That relationship has been all over the place, right?
Yeah. Oh, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. Now that's complicated. Back in the Cold War, they were tight. Then things went sour. Then came 9/11, and they had to work together on counterterrorism. Up, down, all around. Depends what's happening in the region, what the U.S. wants at that moment.
Makes sense. Afghanistan seems to play a big role too, right? Pakistan and the war on terror, their links with the Taliban, that's got to create tension.
Exactly. The U.S. needed Pakistan's help in Afghanistan, but they weren't happy about Pakistan supporting certain groups either. Shared interests, by UT, fundamental disagreements. Tough to say where that relationship goes next.
A tough balancing act again, working with the US but also looking out for their own interests in the region. And then there's the Middle East, another area where Pakistan has to tread carefully. How do they manage it with countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran, who often want opposite things?
Another balancing act, you got it. Saudi Arabia has been helping them economically for a long time, while Iran's a neighbor. Shared culture, religion. Both relationships are important, but it takes some serious diplomatic skills, especially with all the sectarian tension going on.
Okay, we focused a lot on the tough stuff, but are there any bright spots? Amidst all this, does Pakistan have a shot at a good future? They seem to have a lot of potential if they can get past all these obstacles.
Well, there are definitely reasons to be optimistic. One big one, their young population, one of the youngest in the world. If they can harness that, it could be a huge asset.
Interesting. You usually hear about young populations as a problem, right? Unemployment, lack of opportunities. But you seem to see it as a strength. What makes you so optimistic about the younger generation in Pakistan?
Well, they're more aware of the issues. Corruption, inequality, the bad education and healthcare systems. And they're not just complaining, they're trying to find solutions.
So they're inheriting the problems, but also inheriting this sense of responsibility, wanting to fix things. That's encouraging. But how are they actually making a difference? What are some examples of young people driving change in Pakistan?
We're seeing it all over. The tech startup scene is booming, young entrepreneurs tackling local problems in new ways.
Yeah.
And social activism is on the rise too. They're pushing for more transparency from the government, better governance overall, a more inclusive system.
Wow, that's really refreshing to hear. They're not afraid to challenge how things are done, to demand more from their leaders. Maybe this generation really can change Pakistan for the better, but they need the right support, right?
Absolutely. Education, skills training, that's key. And they need an environment where they can start businesses, succeed on their own. Most importantly, their voices have to be heard in politics.
It's not just about giving them a place at the table. It's about making sure their ideas are listened to, that they have real influence. But it's not just about the youth, is it? They're strengthening democratic institutions, tackling corruption.
Right, those are crucial too. For democracy to work, you need a truly independent judiciary. Elections have to be fair. People need to be able to speak freely. The press, too. Those are the foundations.
And what about corruption? It seems like that holds back a lot of developing countries. Is Pakistan making any progress there?
It's a tough one, deeply rooted. But there have been some positive steps. More transparency, some big names have been prosecuted for corruption. It sends a message, no one's above the law.
That's a good start, showing that the rules apply to everyone. But it's not just about punishment, right? It's about changing the whole culture, making transparency and accountability just how things are done.
Exactly. It's a long process. You need the political will, strong institutions, and people need to get involved too. But it's worth fighting for. Corruption destroys trust, hurts the economy, keeps things unequal.
And speaking of the economy, we know Pakistan has its work cut out there. We mentioned CPEC. But what about wider reforms? What's being done to create a stable economy, one that benefits all Pakistanis?
People realize they need to diversify. Can't just rely on agriculture and textiles anymore. They're trying to get foreign investment in things like tech, renewable energy, and making it easier to do business there.
Good steps. But a strong economy isn't just about attracting money from outside, right? You have to deal with poverty, inequality, make sure everyone benefits.
You're absolutely right. Growth has to be inclusive. Invest in education, healthcare, create opportunities for people to move up in life, make sure the most vulnerable aren't left behind.
Sounds like a big task, but there are reasons to be hopeful. A young population wanting change, a realization that they need good governance and economic reforms. It makes you wonder, what's next for Pakistan?
It's a really interesting time to watch how they evolve. So much history, such a vibrant culture. The potential's there. Challenges are huge, but so is the determination to overcome them.
And we can't forget all the complexities we've talked about, from the military's role to how the government works, the different parties, foreign policy, and the possibilities for positive change.
All right, it's been a lot. We've looked at the tension between civilian and military power, how they try to balance regional interests, the judiciary, how elections work, and what the younger generation wants.
Quite a journey. And it's clear, understanding Pakistani politics means going beyond the simple stories. It's full of contradictions, hopes clashing with reality, outside pressures mixing with what's happening inside. It's a story that's still being written.
And that's what makes it so interesting. We'll have to see how it all plays out, what choices Pakistan makes in the coming years.
I agree. It reminds us that even in a world that often seems predictable, there are still places where anything could happen, where both progress and setbacks are possible. And that keeps us all wanting to know more. Wow, that was a lot to take in. Pakistani politics, it's definitely complicated, but super interesting too. I feel like we just scratched the surface, but hopefully our listeners have a better sense of what's going on now.
Yeah, we covered a lot. The history, how the government's set up, who the main players are, what challenges they're facing, and of course the potential for things to change. It's not a simple story, that's for sure.
One thing that stuck with me, their history really matters. It's not just the past, it's like it's still shaping what's happening today. The military coups, the partition, how much power the military still has, it's all connected.
Absolutely. To really understand Pakistan, you got to understand where they've been, what's happened, good and bad. It's all part of who they are now.
And then you've got where they're located, surrounded by powerful countries. Makes foreign policy a real headache.
Right. One wrong move could throw everything off balance.
They've got India, China, the US, all these relationships to juggle. And it all affects what happens inside Pakistan, too.
It's like a giant chess game where every move has consequences. Pakistan's trying to get what it needs, but also keep things from getting out of control in the whole region. Tricky stuff.
So, big question then, what's next for Pakistan? Knowing all this, what do you think the future holds?
The million-dollar question. So many factors involved, it's impossible to say for sure. But there are some things to watch out for. The younger generation, for example, they're going to be key.
Yeah, we talked about that. So many young people in Pakistan, and they're demanding change. They're online, connected to the world. They're not putting up with the corruption and the old ways of doing things.
Exactly. They could completely change the country if things go right.
Yeah.
But it depends. Do they get a real chance to participate in politics? Are their ideas listened to?
It can't just be token representation, right? They need real influence, the power to actually make things different. Sounds like a huge task, but also really exciting to think about.
It is. And it's not just on them. The whole system has to get stronger. The courts need to be independent. Elections need to be fair. People need to be able to speak their minds freely.
It's about building a government that's actually accountable to the people, that respects the law, that gives everyone a fair shot. It'll take time, but it's gotta happen if they want real stability and for things to improve for everyone.
Totally. And we can't forget about the economy. We discussed CBAC, but that's only one piece. They need wider reforms, new industries, more investment from overseas, more jobs. That's how people's lives actually get better.
Right, it's got to be about more than just attracting money. Poverty, inequality, those have to be addressed too. Everyone needs to benefit.
Absolutely. Growth that leaves people behind isn't real growth.
So it's a long road ahead, but there's hope. Pakistan's at this crossroads, a young generation that wants things to be different, people realizing they need good governance and a better economy. Makes you wonder what the next chapter will be.
I'm definitely keeping an eye on them. They've been through so much, but they always find a way to move forward. It's a reminder that even in a world that can feel kind of predictable, there are still places where the ending is uncertain. It could go either way, and that's what keeps us paying attention.
Absolutely. It's been a real deep dive, and it's clear there's so much more to learn. So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep digging. Read up on Pakistan, follow the news, talk to people. The more we understand what's going on in the world, the better we can make things right.
And always remember, there's always more to learn. Stay curious, keep that desire to explore, and keep taking those deep dives into topics that challenge you, that make you think differently. That's what makes learning and life itself so interesting.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Pakistani politics. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep on diving deep.